In the peaceful mountain town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, a 90-year-old woman was about to remind a dangerous motorcycle gang why you should never underestimate a veteran. Dorothy Harrison looked like any ordinary grandmother with her white hair and gentle smile, until the day the Iron Scorpions made the fatal mistake of targeting her small diner. What this ruthless gang didn't know was that this sweet-looking woman was a decorated Navy nurse who had served in 3 wars and saved over 500 lives under enemy fire. When their intimidation turned violent, Dorothy made one phone call that would bring her past crashing into the present. The Iron Scorpions, led by the vicious Razor, thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. Instead, they were about to face 60 combat veterans whose lives Dorothy had saved decades ago on battlefields around the world. What began as harassment and threats ended in an extraordinary showdown that would change Pine Ridge forever. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special story for you. The morning everything changed. The morning air was crisp and cool as Dorothy Harrison unlocked the front door of Dot's Diner, the same establishment she had been running for the past 35 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her age, her posture remained remarkably straight, a testament to her years of military discipline. "Morning, Miss Dot," called Miguel, the young dishwasher, as he arrived for his shift. His smile was bright and genuine, the kind that made the early morning hours bearable. "Good morning, Miguel. Ready for another busy day?" Dorothy replied, her voice warm but carrying an undertone of authority that came from decades of commanding respect in military hospitals. The diner sat at the corner of Main Street and Pine Avenue, a modest building with red vinyl booths and a long counter with chrome stools. The walls were decorated with vintage photographs of Pine Ridge from the 1950s, along with a few discreet military commendations that most customers never noticed. Dorothy moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. Coffee brewing, grill heating, flour being measured for biscuits. The simple tasks brought her peace, a far cry from the chaos of field hospitals where she had once worked under the thunder of artillery fire. Her mind wandered to the Veterans Council meetings scheduled for that afternoon. These gatherings were more than just social events. They were a connection to her past, to the men and women who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to see things that ordinary people couldn't imagine. The peaceful morning was shattered by the distant rumble of motorcycles. The sound grew louder, more aggressive, until it seemed to shake the very windows of the diner. Dorothy's hand paused over the coffee pot as she watched through the front window. 10 motorcycles, then 15, then 20 rolled into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming minaciously under the morning sun. The Iron Scorpions had arrived. Dorothy's military training activated automatically. Assess the situation, maintain composure, identify exits, evaluate threats. Her heart rate didn't increase, her hands didn't shake. She had faced worse, much worse. The leader, a man they called Razor, dismounted his bike with deliberate menace. His leather vest was covered in patches that spoke of violence and territory disputes. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the diner before landing on Dorothy through the window. "Well, well, well," Razor's voice carried across the parking lot as he approached the entrance. "Heard this place has the best breakfast in town. Time we came to check it out." Dorothy continued preparing for the day, her expression neutral. The other customers, 3 elderly regulars and a young couple, looked nervously toward the door as it swung open. The Iron Scorpions filed in, their boots heavy on the checkered linoleum floor. They spread out deliberately, some taking booths, others positioning themselves near exits. It was a tactical occupation, and Dorothy recognized it immediately. "Welcome to Dot's Diner," she said evenly, her voice betraying no fear. "Coffee?" Razor approached the counter, his eyes scanning the photographs on the wall. One caught his attention, a black-and-white image of a much younger Dorothy in her Navy uniform, standing beside a field hospital tent. "Navy nurse, huh?" Razor's laugh was harsh and mocking. "What did you do, sweetheart? Serve coffee to the real soldiers?" The words struck something deep inside Dorothy, but her expression remained unchanged. They couldn't know about the nights she'd spent in makeshift operating rooms with bombs falling outside. They couldn't know about the hundreds of wounded men she'd pulled back from death's door. The medals that sat in a box in her closet told those stories, but she had never been one to boast. "I served my country," Dorothy replied simply, placing a menu in front of him. "Just like many others." One of the other gang members, a tall man with a scarred face who went by Snake, sauntered closer. His eyes were cold as they examined Dorothy. "You know what this town needs, old lady?" Snake's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Protection. Things can happen to a nice place like this. Fires, break-ins, accidents. We can make sure none of that happens." Dorothy's eyes met his without flinching. She had stared down enemy combatants, had worked through mortar attacks, had held her ground when others fled. A street gang trying to extort her was nothing compared to what she had survived. "I appreciate the concern," Dorothy said calmly, "but we don't need protection. Pine Ridge has always taken care of its own." Razor's face darkened. He wasn't used to being refused, especially not by someone who looked as vulnerable as Dorothy. His hand slammed down on the counter, making the coffee cups rattle. "Maybe you didn't hear us clearly, Grandma. This is our town now. Every business pays for protection. That includes this dump." Miguel emerged from the kitchen, his face pale but determined. "Miss Dot, should I call the police?" "That won't be necessary," Dorothy replied, though she could see in Razor's eyes that this situation was escalating beyond simple intimidation. The young couple at a nearby booth stood quickly, leaving money on their table and hurrying toward the exit. The three elderly regulars stayed frozen in their seats, fear etched on their faces. Razor grabbed a plate from behind the counter and let it drop. It shattered on the floor with a crash that echoed through the suddenly silent diner. "Accidents happen," he said with a cruel smile, "especially when people don't cooperate." Dorothy straightened her back, her eyes never leaving Razor's face. "Young man, I've seen real threats. I've worked in field hospitals while enemy fire rained down around us. I've held dying men in my arms while the world exploded outside. Do you really think breaking a plate frightens me?" For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Razor's face. There was something in this old woman's voice, something in her steady gaze that suggested she was far more dangerous than she appeared. "Boys," Razor addressed his gang without taking his eyes off Dorothy, "I think Grandma here needs a lesson in respect." Two gang members moved toward the kitchen, while others blocked the exits. Snake picked up another plate and smashed it deliberately on the floor. The sound of breaking ceramic filled the air. Dorothy's hand moved slowly toward the phone, mounted on the wall behind the counter. It was an old rotary phone, the kind most people had replaced decades ago, but it still worked perfectly. "I'm going to give you one chance to leave peacefully," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the same tone she had used when commanding nurses during crises. "Walk out that door now, and we'll forget this happened." Razor's laughter was ugly and threatening. "Or what, you'll call the cops? By the time they get here, this place will be kindling." "No," Dorothy replied, her fingers touching the phone. "I'm not calling the police." Something in her tone made Razor hesitate. "Then who are you calling?" Dorothy began to dial, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Do you boys know what the Silver Angels are?" Several of the gang members shifted uncomfortably. The Silver Angels were legendary in military circles, a motorcycle group composed entirely of combat veterans who had served together in various wars. They weren't just any veterans. They were men who had seen the worst of combat and had formed an unbreakable bond. "I don't care about some old soldier club," Razor blustered. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. The phone connected. A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Harrison, Marcus." Dorothy's voice softened slightly. "Remember Da Nang, the night the hospital took that direct hit?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice changed, becoming warmer and more alert. Dorothy Harrison. Of course I remember. You saved my life that night. Saved all our lives. Marcus, I've got some young men here who seem to think they can intimidate an old Navy nurse," Dorothy said. Her eyes locked on Razor. "They don't seem to understand that respect is earned, not taken." The voice on the other end hardened. "Where are you?" "Dot's Diner, Main Street, Pine Ridge. We're 2 hours out." "But Dot, Sergeant Miller's chapter is in Pine Ridge. I'll call him now. He'll be there in 10 minutes. As Dorothy hung up the phone, the atmosphere in the diner had shifted dramatically. Several of the Iron Scorpions were exchanging nervous glances. The Silver Angels weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a brotherhood forged in combat, and they had a reputation for taking care of their own. "You're bluffing," Razor said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Some old veterans club isn't going to scare us." Dorothy smiled slightly, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Then I suppose you'll want to stick around and find out." In the distance, the sound of approaching motorcycles began to fill the air. But this wasn't the chaotic roar of the Iron Scorpions. This was different, disciplined, synchronized, powerful. It was the sound of men who moved as a unit, who had trained together, fought together, and would protect their own without hesitation. Razor's face paled slightly as the sound grew louder. "Mount up," he barked to his gang. "We're not done here, old woman." Not by a long shot. The Iron Scorpions scrambled for the door, but they were too late. The first motorcycles of the Silver Angels were already pulling into the parking lot, their formation precise and tactical. At their head was Sergeant Robert "Rock" Miller, a massive man with silver hair and a chest full of combat decorations visible on his leather vest. Behind him came 15 more riders, all veterans, all men who owed their lives to the woman standing calmly in the diner. Miguel watched wide-eyed from the kitchen door as the scene unfolded. The 3 elderly customers finally released the breath they'd been holding. Through the window, Dorothy could see Rock dismounting, his movements still carrying the authority of his military years despite being in his 70s. The Silver Angels formed a wall between the Iron Scorpions and the diner entrance. Razor tried to maintain his composure, but he was clearly outnumbered and outmatched. "This is none of your business, old man." Rock's voice was calm, but carried an edge like tempered steel. "That woman in there saved my life in Kandahar. Worked on me for 6 hours straight while the base was under attack. So when someone threatens her, it becomes very much my business." The Iron Scorpions found themselves surrounded. More Silver Angels were arriving, their bikes pulling in from different streets. Within minutes, there were 30 veterans present, and the numbers kept growing. "You boys picked the wrong person to mess with," Rock continued. "See that old lady you were threatening? She's legend, saved more lives than I can count. There are at least 100 men within 100 miles who owe their lives to her." One of the younger Silver Angels stepped forward. "My dad's alive because of her. Took shrapnel to the chest in Desert Storm. She kept him alive long enough to get him to a surgical unit," another voice called out. "She pulled my unit out of a burning transport in Iraq. Never left until every one of us was safe. The stories continued, each Silver Angel sharing how Dorothy Harrison had touched their lives or the lives of people they loved. The Iron Scorpions shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had made a serious miscalculation. Inside the diner, Dorothy watched through the window, her expression unreadable. She hadn't wanted this confrontation, but she had learned long ago that sometimes you had to stand your ground, that bullies only understood strength. Razor's bravado was crumbling. "We didn't know." "That's the problem," Rock interrupted. "You didn't know and you didn't care. You saw an old woman and thought she was an easy target. But let me tell you something about Dorothy Harrison. She's got more courage in her little finger than your entire gang combined." The sound of approaching sirens added another layer to the situation. Chief Patterson, himself a Marine Corps veteran, arrived with 3 patrol cars. He took one look at the scene, the Silver Angels, the Iron Scorpions, and the diner, and immediately understood what had happened. "Razor," Chief Patterson called out, stepping from his vehicle. "I think it's time you and your boys moved along. And before you go, there's something you should know. That woman you just threatened, she's a recipient of the Navy Cross, 3rd highest military decoration. She earned it by staying at her post during a sustained enemy attack, saving 47 critically wounded soldiers while under direct fire." Razor's face went from pale to ashen. The Navy Cross, that wasn't just any medal. That was given for extraordinary heroism in combat. "We didn't mean any harm," Razor started to say, but Rock cut him off with a harsh laugh. "You broke her property. You threatened her. You tried to extort her. That sounds like harm to me." Chief Patterson approached Razor directly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay for the damage you caused. Every broken plate. Then you're going to leave Pine Ridge and not come back. Because if I see you or any of your gang in this town again, I'll arrest you for criminal threatening, attempted extortion, and anything else I can think of." The Iron Scorpions had no choice. Razor pulled out a wad of cash and handed it to Rock. "For the plates," he muttered. "And an apology," Rock demanded. "To Miss Harrison, face to face." Razor looked like he wanted to refuse, but surrounded by 30 combat veterans and the police, he had no leverage. He walked slowly to the diner entrance, Rock and Patterson following closely. Dorothy met him at the door. Her posture straight, her expression neutral. "Ma'am," Razor forced the words out, "I apologize for the disrespect and the damage." Dorothy studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You know what real strength is, young man? It's not intimidating people weaker than you. It's protecting them. It's standing up when it's dangerous to do so. It's doing the right thing even when no one's watching." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You and your gang could be something better than what you are. But that choice is yours to make." Razor didn't respond. He turned and walked back to his bike, his gang following. Within minutes, the Iron Scorpions had roared out of Pine Ridge, their departure lacking the arrogance of their arrival. As the sound of their motorcycles faded, the Silver Angels began to relax. Several of them approached the diner, eager to reconnect with the woman who had saved their lives, or the lives of their loved ones. Rock was the first to enter, pulling Dorothy into a careful hug. "Dot, you should have called sooner. We would have been here." "I handled it," Dorothy replied with a slight smile. "But I appreciate the backup." Miguel emerged from the kitchen, his eyes wide with awe. "Miss Dot, you never told me you were a hero." "I'm not a hero, Miguel," Dorothy corrected gently. "I just did my job, like thousands of other nurses and medics did." "With all due respect, ma'am," one of the younger Silver Angels spoke up, "that's not what my grandfather says. He tells everyone you're the reason he got to meet his grandchildren." The diner began to fill with Silver Angels, many of whom Dorothy hadn't seen in years. Stories flowed freely. Memories of battlefield medicine, of impossible odds, of a Navy nurse who had never given up on any of them. Chief Patterson pulled Dorothy aside. "You know they'll be back, right? The Iron Scorpions. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but Razor's pride won't let this go." Dorothy nodded slowly. "I know, but next time they'll think twice. And next time this town will be ready." Rock overheard the conversation. "She's right. We need to organize, set up a proper watch. The Silver Angels have chapters all over the state. We can coordinate, make sure Pine Ridge stays protected. More than that," Dorothy added thoughtfully, "we need to show this community that they don't have to be afraid. Fear is what gives gangs like the Iron Scorpions their power." As the morning progressed into afternoon, Dorothy found herself at the center of an impromptu reunion. Veterans she had treated decades ago shared updates about their lives, their families, their triumphs over the injuries that had nearly claimed them. But beneath the warmth and camaraderie, Dorothy couldn't shake Chief Patterson's warning. Razor had retreated, but men like him didn't accept defeat easily. The Iron Scorpions would regroup, would plan, would come back with something worse. She looked around at the Silver Angels filling her diner. These men who had faced death and come back stronger. They thought the crisis was over, that one show of force had been enough, but Dorothy knew better. Her years of military experience had taught her that the first battle was rarely the last. And something in Razor's eyes as he left told her this was far from finished. The real war for Pine Ridge was just beginning. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shadows through the diner's windows, Dorothy Harrison made a decision. If the Iron Scorpions wanted a war, they would get one. But it wouldn't be fought with fists and violence. It would be fought with strategy, with unity, and with the kind of courage that could only come from people who had already faced their worst fears and survived. The phone call she had made that morning was just the beginning. Now she needed to make another call to the man at the head of the Silver Angels National Organization. If they were going to protect Pine Ridge properly, they needed to be organized, prepared, and united, because Dorothy Harrison hadn't survived 3 wars by hoping for the best. She had survived by planning for the worst and being ready when it came, and it was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive through artillery barrages and enemy attacks. The Iron Scorpions would return, and when they did, Pine Ridge would be ready. 3 days had passed since the Iron Scorpions left Pine Ridge, and the town had transformed. The Silver Angels hadn't just provided protection, they had organized the entire community. Business owners attended safety meetings, surveillance cameras appeared on storefronts, and a neighborhood watch system connected everyone through a simple text alert network. Dorothy stood in her diner during the quiet afternoon hours, reviewing the security protocols with Rock and Chief Patterson. Through the window, she could see Silver Angels stationed at strategic points throughout downtown, their presence both reassuring and ominous. Intel suggests Razor called in reinforcements from 3 neighboring chapters, Chief Patterson reported, spreading a map across the counter. "We're looking at potentially 60 to 70 riders," Rock nodded grimly. "Marcus called this morning. The National Silver Angels leadership is sending additional support. We'll have 50 veterans here by nightfall." "This is escalating too quickly," Dorothy observed, her tactical mind analyzing the situation. "Razor's pride is driving this, but there's something else. Gangs don't commit this many resources unless there's profit involved." Sarah Chen, a Marine Corps veteran who managed the local hardware store, entered the diner with urgent news. "Jot, we've been investigating the Iron Scorpions' activities in other towns. They're not just running protection rackets. They're moving illegal substances, using intimidation to establish distribution networks. The pieces fell into place in Dorothy's mind. Pine Ridge was supposed to be their next hub. When we pushed back, we didn't just hurt Razor's pride. We threatened their entire operation. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains in shades of orange and gold, the sound everyone had been dreading filled the air. Motorcycles, dozens of them, approaching from multiple directions. The Iron Scorpions arrived with overwhelming force, their numbers swelling to nearly 80 riders. They congregated at the edge of town, engines rumbling like distant thunder, a show of strength meant to terrify. But Pine Ridge didn't cower. Store owners stood in their doorways. The Silver Angels positioned themselves throughout downtown. Regular citizens, many of them veterans themselves, took up watch positions. The community had united in a way Razor hadn't anticipated. Dorothy stood outside her diner, Rock beside her, as Razor dismounted and approached. His face was a mask of fury and desperation. "Last chance, old woman," Razor snarled. "Leave town tonight or we burn it to the ground." Dorothy's response was calm and measured. "No," the single word hung in the air like a challenge. Behind her, the Silver Angels stood ready. Around them, the townspeople watched with determined faces. "You can't win this," Razor shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. "We outnumber you. We'll destroy everything you've built." "Perhaps," Dorothy replied. "But that's the difference between you and us. We're not afraid of sacrifice. We've already faced worse than anything you can imagine. We've stood in places where death was certain and chose to stand anyway. That's what real courage looks like." She stepped forward, her 90 years showing not weakness but the weight of experience. "You see numbers and think you see strength. But strength isn't about how many people you can gather through fear. It's about how many stand beside you by choice." Rock moved to stand beside Dorothy. Then Sarah, then Chief Patterson. One by one, Silver Angels and townspeople formed a line, standing together not out of obligation, but out of loyalty, respect, and shared purpose. Razor looked at his gang, seeing uncertainty in their faces. They had signed up for easy intimidation, not a war against decorated combat veterans and an entire unified community. "This is your last chance to make a different choice," Dorothy continued. "You can continue down this path of violence and destruction, or you can ride away and never come back. Because if you start this fight, we will finish it. And when the federal authorities arrive, they'll bring charges that will put you away for decades." As if on cue, the sound of helicopters filled the air. State police and federal DEA agents had been coordinating with Chief Patterson, waiting for exactly this moment when the Iron Scorpions had committed their full force. Razor's face went pale as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. The overwhelming show of force he'd intended as intimidation had become evidence of conspiracy and organized criminal activity. "You set us up," he whispered. Understanding dawning. "No," Dorothy corrected. "You set yourselves up. Every threat, every act of intimidation, every criminal connection you made. We just gave you enough rope to hang yourselves." The federal agents moved in swiftly, professional and efficient. The Iron Scorpions, trapped and outnumbered by both veterans and law enforcement, had no choice but to surrender. As Razor was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Dorothy one final time. "I underestimated you." "Most people do," Dorothy replied simply. "That's their mistake." Epilogue, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Pine Ridge had become something unexpected. The trial of the Iron Scorpions had exposed a multi-state criminal operation, leading to dozens of arrests. The town that had been targeted for exploitation had instead become a model for community resistance. Dorothy's diner was busier than ever, a gathering place where veterans and civilians shared stories and built friendships. The Silver Angels maintained a permanent presence, but their role had evolved from protection to community service, organizing youth programs and veteran support networks. Rock sat at his usual spot at the counter, reviewing plans for the new community center the Silver Angels were building. "You know, Dot, when you made that first phone call, I thought we were just coming to chase off some troublemakers." Dorothy smiled, pouring him fresh coffee. "And instead you reminded us what we fought for all those years. Not just to defeat enemies, but to protect communities, to stand for something bigger than ourselves." Through the window, Dorothy could see children playing in the park, their parents watching without fear. Business owners chatted on sidewalks. Silver Angels rode past with waves and smiles, their presence now a symbol of safety rather than conflict. Chief Patterson entered, hanging up his hat. "Got some news from the prosecutor's office. Razor took a plea deal. 25 years federal prison. The rest of the gang got various sentences." "It's over, Dot, really over." But Dorothy shook her head gently. "It's not over, Chief, it's just beginning. What we built here, this community standing together, this needs to continue. Other towns face the same threats. They need to know they can fight back, that unity is stronger than fear." Sarah Chen arrived with a newspaper featuring a front-page story about Pine Ridge's stand against organized crime. "We're getting calls from all over the country. Towns wanting to know how we did it. Then we'll show them," Dorothy declared. "We'll share what we learned. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing together despite it. That communities are strongest when they refuse to be divided by intimidation." As evening fell over Pine Ridge, Dorothy stood outside her diner, watching the sunset paint the mountains. 90 years had taught her many lessons, but the most important was this: real strength came not from force or fear, but from the bonds between people who chose to stand together. The Iron Scorpions had come to Pine Ridge expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they found something that couldn't be defeated because it was built on something unbreakable. The courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when it mattered most. Dorothy Harrison had made one phone call that changed everything. But the real power hadn't been in that call. It had been in the community that answered it, in the veterans who stood together, in the townspeople who refused to be victims. That was the legacy of Pine Ridge, not a story of victory over enemies, but a testament to what happens when people remember their strength, their courage, and their refusal to let fear win. And in the mountains of Colorado, in a small diner on Main Street, a 90-year-old Navy veteran smiled, knowing that the best battles were the ones that ended not with destruction, but with hope. The end. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have more incredible true stories of courage and determination coming your way. See you in the next one.